Episode 5 of Ultraman Omega was Mythic. It was beautiful, restrained, emotional, and intentional. Episode 6 feels like the opposite. Not just a weak episode, not just a weird episode. This feels like a mess. I was actually thinking, who wrote this? I haven't checked, but it can't be the guy who wrote 5, right? What makes it worse is that it's a mess right after Omega proved it could be transcendent. So today, I'm not here to dunk on Omega. I'm here to explain why episode 6 feels like a broken promise and why this might be one of the most structurally bad episodes Ultraman has delivered in a long time. Yeah, I stand by that. I definitely stand by that. So the first episode, or the first issue with the episode, is that it breaks Omega's premise. Kaiju are new, supposedly. They've never dealt with them before, and they're trying to figure it out. And yet somehow there's an analog to this Earth animal that looks just like it. In this mole video that we see that Ayumu pulls up, it's the same suit reframed as a little mole instead of this giant kaiju. And it's strange because it's supposed to be something novel, something new to the world, but it has this parallel to something familiar, and that loses the immersion. That ruins the fact that this is supposed to be an intrusive kind of invasive species, and it just doesn't work. The next thing would be the biology and logic collapse. So supposedly, I can only assume that they're assuming that these kaiju have the same life cycle as this little mole, which lives underground, emerges every now and then, and it does this mating dance with this dancing and whatever. And I don't remember if the little mole is actually underground for years or not, but that's kind of what they think is going to happen, that if they take the kaiju, the pair, and put them back underground and bury them, everything will be fine. Because they have this nesting behavior, and they're inferring from that it's going to be the same situation. However, these moles are this big, the kaiju is, that big. So how can you assume that their life cycle is going to be the same, especially on a world where the kaiju are new and you have not been able to establish a pattern to observe the data? They have all this confidence in what's going to happen with the kaiju, even though they shouldn't, because kaiju are new. Also, the female appears to be dead. And then episode never, like, they call her a corpse. Kosei says, oh, it's just a corpse. Why are you worried about that? Why are we going to go out there? And Soruto feels like he should, because something in his memory is telling him there's something else going on here. So he must know that there's a second one that's going to appear. Which makes sense. That's internally logical. What isn't internally logical is the fact that at the end, even though she's dead, or appears very much to be dead, they almost treat her as if she's hibernating, because she had been hibernating before she died from the sun, I guess. And then her corpse gets put into her nest, and her mate gets put into the nest, and everybody acts like it's a happy ending. And that's really weird. It's like this, oh, they'll be fine, and they won't be troubling anybody for a while. She's dead. She's not ever going to trouble anybody ever again. When the mail comes out in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, 50 years, I don't know, whatever. He might go on a rampage because you put him in there with his dead mate or mate. Anyway, I don't want to go into that. It's gross to think about the biology and what it can mean. But so I'm moving on. And then third, the episode breaks the promise of quality. Episode 5 was so good. It's a beautiful mythic episode, and this one is just a mess because it doesn't make any sense. And even you could argue that episode 5 doesn't make sense in some ways. But I would argue that in other ways it does, because it's more of a mythic episode than it is a, non-mythic episode, like a regular episode. But it's very meaningful and very beautiful and very well done. Speaking of well done, I've been complaining about the quality of the story, the lack of logic, but the action in this episode wasn't even very good. There was a lot more action in episode 6 than there was in episode 5, but the minimal action in episode 5 was executed so beautifully, done so well. It was so thematic and meaningful that it blows this episode's action out of the water when there was a lot more of it, but it was just a lot lower quality. So that was not good. Episode 5 was it was a beautiful episode on many levels, including the action. That little tear from the Sakura petal that looked like Omega was crying, gorgeous. Here, we get silly music and weird dancing and an odd fight. It's super awkward. It's poorly staged. There's no meaning to it. There's no emotion in the battle. It's just something that's happening because it has to, I guess. And I definitely think this episode is a craft failure. And it feels like the trust is broken because while there have been things in Omega that didn't make sense. Like in episode 2, they talked about this amphibian type kaiju that was also had its nest disturbed by the changing of the levees or the dams or whatever from like, you know, decades ago, which didn't make sense. This doubles down. This goes even farther and just continues to make that mistake. It compounds that mistake. It compounds that error in storytelling and choice and ruining of the scenario for what gain? I have no idea. And it cements it as like, this is a show that's not going to take itself seriously. It's not going to take its premise seriously. And it's going to be aw shucks for no good reason and just want to treat the audience like they're idiots. Like the kids watching, like, it doesn't matter. They're going to pick up on the illogical, on the logical fallacies and on the inconsistencies in here, but it doesn't really matter because they're just kids. Or what and I don't want to ascribe an attitude or a reason why it ended up like this to anybody, but there has to be a reason it ended up like this. Was nobody paying attention? Was somebody shackled and they let somebody ruin the episode? I don't know. Actually, I'm calling an audible. I'm checking into this episode to see who wrote it because it's just too different to not matter. It's too different to not matter. Somebody has to know. Somebody has to be held accountable for this in some way. So, okay, I'll just go through one by one. Here Comes the Alien was written by Tojizo Nemoto, as was episode 2, which had a little logical fallacy in it. Not a huge deal breaker, but weird. Episode 3 was written by Junichiro Ashiki. Episode 4 was written by Junichiro Ashiki. Or Ashiki. Okay. Episode 5 was written by Masaya Hondo, which makes sense. I raved about him previously. And, okay, episode 6 was written by Akio Miyoshi. Let's look at what Akio Miyoshi has done. I feel like this is not wasting our time. I feel like it's value added because I want to know why it's so different. And I'm going to check and see if he worked on any of the other episodes so we can anticipate whether or not there's going to be another strange one like this. And another outlier, I'll say. I'll be nice. He wrote 2 episodes of Ultraman Ginga S, 1 episode of Ultraman X, 1 episode of Ultraman Orb, and 2 episodes of Omega. Okay, it already tells me. The Kaiju Search and a close-up for the 2. So I'll just anticipate that episode 2, or episode 10 rather, is not going to be very good. But we'll see what happens when we get there. Yeah, wow, okay. I wish him well, and I hope episode 10 proves that this was just an aberration for some reason, and it's an amazing episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the episode, what you thought about it. Do you agree that like Omega is kind of breaking its promise here that it made with the rest of the show so far? Did this lose your goodwill? What did you think about it overall? I would love to know. Let me know in the comments. Also, you can find all my other Ultraman Omega analysis in the pinned comment. Until next time, folks, this is MJ with Going Ultra and Henshin Inspection signing out.